Hey guys, what is going on? Hope you are all doing very well. Today we got a very exciting video for you. We're going to compare the differences from the V1 Limitless versus the V2 Limitless. I myself was super interested in knowing exactly what has changed with the V2 Limitless, and then I know that if you have all these advantages, there's probably going to be some disadvantages, and they're usually unspoken. So I want to go and take a look at exactly what we're gaining and giving up with these vehicles. Now, in order to make all of this happen, what I had to do is take my V1 Limitless and essentially strip out all the components out of it and return it to its stock configuration so we really truly can compare apples to apples in this video here today. I've gone ahead and done that. I'm laughing because I ended up recording this video already once, and I'm going to do it again because my 2012 computer just could not hold on to the files for us to get through this. So here we are, round two. It's going to be even better than the first time I recorded this video. In order to capture all of my thoughts, I've written everything on the whiteboard that you typically see in other videos here on the channel. And because of this, I do have to warn you that thoughts may be coming from one topic. We may jump to another topic and then possibly return. I don't want to miss anything that's written on this whiteboard, so we're going to go from top down. So just before we switch up the cameras, switch up the angle, and show you the V1 versus V2 Limitlesses here on the table, I do want to start off by talking about the obvious one. If you've clicked on the video, you already know that the V1 Limitless comes with this body that's already pre-painted with blue, and all the stickers and everything are applied to it, as well as the rest of the car. And the V2 Limitless is different in the sense that you have what is known as the rattle can. That's how they're defining this type of body, where you have to paint it yourself. Something I personally am not good at, but I know a lot of you guys have really good artistic skills to make really cool designs on this type of platform here with the clear Lexan. So for all of you, this will be good. For someone like me, this is not so good, but I think overall, you can always paint it very flat color, add on stickers to really juice up the look of the body. So probably a good advantage is going to this type of clear Lexan that allows you to customize your own Limitless. This way we don't have them all looking the same. So now let's head in and change the cams and look at the rest of the advantages and disadvantages that we have with these vehicles. All right, we just got that body color difference out of the way. Now let's step up and talk about the very first thing that I want to bring your attention to. And this is something that at first I was a little bit disappointed, even though it's such a small item here. So you can see that this here is the servo arm, and it controls our steering. That's what it's connected to. This particular one is the V2 that we're looking at, and it has a marking here as Spectrum. And that's important because if we look over onto the V1 here, this is a high-tech servo. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, and I did not pull this servo out, is because this arm, as it came right from the factory, was a 25-tooth spline, which works very well with high-tech and many other brands of servos. However, the one in the V2 is not a 25-tooth spline. It is, in fact, a 23-tooth spline, which works very well with the Spectrum servos that they offer. Unfortunately, I have no Spectrum servos, especially in this class, where I'm able to drop any servo into this for the time being. And the only way that I can actually get a hold of the right one, it serves as an optional part on the website, and you have to bring in that specific servo arm, and then you can use a 25-tooth spline. That would work very well for those high-tech servos and other brands that you may find are useful for this. All right, so now we're jumping right into the V2. We're taking a look at the center section of this model, and you can see that things, if you're familiar with the V1, this is very different in terms of the differences between the V1 versus V2 when you're talking about the center part of the driveline. That's the V2. This is what it looks like for the V1. Right off the bat, you can see that this is actually quite smaller in this area. You don't even have as much of a distance for the motor as you are limited in how much it can actually slide over, where you have a lot larger of a slide range here for the motor mount that's on the V2. A big bonus, you can see that the plastic that they use has been eliminated on the V2. It is completely all metal on top here, as well as the front and rear side of this center section. So that's a big bonus from one version to the next. And then when you take a look at some of the important parts, is we have an equal length drive shaft in the front as well as in the rear. And the way that they're able to accomplish this is the center spool section has this extended arm that is able to shorten the distance of your rear drive dog bone. And this is significant because it's going to prevent some of the vibrations that those we're seeing with the V1. The V1, you have an output cup right here at the center spool, and you have a massively long center rear dog bone, and this is what you can see right here. And oftentimes for the guys that were going really fast, getting the shaft up to extremely high speeds, they would end up seeing this contact the plastic because of the vibrations. And because that is a major issue, they had to go and create their own extension off here, which Limitless has listened to the crowd and done it themselves here on the V2. That's a big advantage for the guys who are running fast on this V2 model. Now, in order to complement the change here, because this whole section has moved more rearward, what's happened is these arms here had to go and get swapped out for new parts. So this is now extended and comes to a point that is, again, close to the center spool, but is further than the original one on the V1. You can see that it's shortened up. You know that this has actually moved further. We'll talk about why here shortly, and it goes and gets mounted into that section. And you can also see there has been a change to the chassis plate, which is going to end up being a little bit further in the stamping pattern that you see here versus the V2. So the V2, you can see it's a lot more stretched out because now you have all this room up front, which is important for us. We're going to get to that, as I said, very shortly here. Same with the rear support. This is also changed. Now, instead of getting longer in the rear, it's actually gotten shorter because you have the whole stamping features being moved towards the rear. So this part is a new part for the V2 as compared with the old model here being the V1. So now let's talk about the actual radio box and where the speed control is mounted. Here is the radio box and the speed control mount for the V2, and here you can see the radio box as well as the ESC mount for the V1. So the obvious difference here is the V2 is much larger for the actual speed control, and you know what, we'll do a test. One of the largest ESCs I own is the Castle XLX2. We dropped that in and you can see it definitely has enough room for it. However, it is a little bit tight and it kind of extends off the backside, but it still can work. And this box is not specifically designed for this XL2. It's more than likely designed for all the Horizon type speed controls, which is something I don't use. I've not had any good luck with the Horizon speed controls, so I'm going to be using Castle in this as well. And when you look at the V1, there's absolutely no chance that this could even remotely fit in here. It's just way too big for the spot. So you can see the difference there. It's not even close, where here you can actually fit it right in, no problem. Now you do pay in order to get this different size. This radio box on the V1 is about the length of the servo, as you can see it right there in the image. And if you look at the V2, the radio box width there has been changed. It is not as wide, so our radio box is now going to be a little bit smaller. So I don't know what you guys throw inside your radio box, but if you do have quite a bit of stuff going on in there, it's not going to be as easy to get everything into the V2. This is the disadvantage and one of the sacrifices that has been made in order to give ourselves a much larger ESC mounting area here. And we'll jump over here to the actual motor mount area. This motor mount, as we talked about before, it is bigger in the sense where you have more adjustability, but not only that, you have a specific gear here that's used on the V2. That is a 39 tooth spool or spur gear here used, where the original one that came with the V1, that is the 34 tooth spur gear used. And the reason why this is important is because if you have a 34 tooth gear and you have, let's say, a 27 tooth gear here on the pinion, you have a small distance between the actual shaft of the drive shaft and where the motor mounts. And because of that, your motor is actually going to shift and be really close to that center shaft. But if you actually have a larger spur gear here, you're able to get away from that by having a large pinion as well as spur, giving you lots of room as the distance away from the shaft is going to be increased. So that's one big advantage, having the larger spur gear there right from stock. Another major improvement is you can look at the space that we have here with the V1. You can see how much my hand takes up in this area. And if we go into this new V2 motor mount area, you can see there's some significant more room added to the motor mount area, which allows us to run bigger motors. So let's go and test with the largest motors that I have for radio controlled applications, and that's going to be the two common ones that are typically used in RC for speedrun guys. This is a 4070 TP power motor that is able to be located in there with very little issue. The motor definitely fits. You just have to figure out how the wiring is actually going to work and how you're going to bend those and make those clear of any obstruction there and get them back routed to your ESC. So we take that out and we place the Castle 1721 in its place. The Castle 1721 is the motor that will be used. Now I do have screws still existing on the motor. I haven't taken them out. I only got one hand to do this, and it comes very clear, well clear of that steering post. So this motor fits as well, and with that extra clearance, once those screws are removed, we know we can gain some room so we can get the sensor cord plugged into this motor. So now both of those motors here fit without any issue. We know that the speed control now fits, so this is a big bonus for this V2 Limitless car. The size that you have here is 110 millimeters by a 50 millimeter diameter. Much improved over the maximum 85 millimeter length, I believe, for the V1, which we saw earlier. Now let's move on to the battery bays. On the V1, we have these massive battery bays. There's two of them, so you can run all kinds of different batteries in this car. Now this bay is about 180 millimeters in length, which is quite significant for any type of radio control vehicle. It's not often that you're going to see batteries that are that long. And then if we move to the actual V2, we're going to put them side by side essentially, so you can see that they're pretty much wheel to wheel, and there's a big difference in the battery bay here for our V2. You're looking at giving up 30 millimeters of length for your battery pack. These come in at 150 millimeters. I actually measured it at 149 millimeters. It is one of the concerns that I have for the battery bay. I know a lot of my batteries are sitting around 150 millimeters in length, so I'm gonna have to squeeze it in tight. And usually I like to have some extra room so that I'm able to play with how the leads actually come out and I don't get anything jammed up against some of the walls. For example, these walls of the battery bay. So this is something that we do lose. You know, we were talking about advantages and disadvantages, and this is definitely going to be on the list of disadvantages by giving up about 30 millimeters in length. Hopefully this does not affect you, and you can run the packs that you already have or plan to purchase. Now, one of the interesting things I saw here is on the box and some of the literature online, Horizon Hobby offers, or advertises I should say, that the V2 Limitless can do 110 miles per hour plus out of the box once you install all the recommended components. Now, the interesting part is both the V1 and the V2, in my opinion, can easily achieve 110 miles per hour with that same recommended setup. There's not a lot of difference that you have to do in order to get up to that 110 mile per hour mark. It might be just dealing with gearing to even it out, because the gearing is different between Limitless V1 and Limitless V2. We'll get to that shortly as well. And yeah, so the big point here is that the 110 miles per hour on the box is definitely, impressive, but these vehicles, both of them, can easily achieve more than 110 miles per hour with recommended setup or a setup that you choose on your own. Okay, so now let's jump back and talk about gears. We did mention that the Limitless V2 here has a 39 tooth spur gear, which is important in a couple different ways. It allows us to get more room with the motor mount, and it allows us to get different gear ratios depending on what you need to run. Where the V1, it comes with a 34 tooth as a spool gear, as a spur gear that's mounted on the center shaft section. What's interesting too about the V1 is it did come with, I believe this is a 27 tooth pinion gear, but the V2 does not include any pinion gear for this vehicle. You have to go and separately purchase a pinion gear that's going to work with this model. This is another slight disadvantage for us, and probably a way to cut costs, because they have put some cost into this vehicle with all of the metal improvements and things that they've had to change around for some of the plastic components as well. All right, something I'm not probably going to be able to give you a good look, but maybe what we can do is we can show images online. There are differences in the front and rear inputs that go to both of these vehicles. This is the V2, and looking at the V1, we don't really see much in this view, but hopefully I can get you an online screenshot. I did look at the online screenshot, and there is a difference. The difference there is that online it shows that the V2 Limitless now comes with improved cups for the input side shaft of the front and rear differential, both of those being 8mm D shaft input cups. And that's important because a lot of power being transmitted through here, you can see the typical pinion gear, just a round hole. You rely entirely in order for the torque to actually pass through and be transmitted to that set screw. And I personally don't like that. I would rather have all the torque being transferred through a solid connection of the D shaft. Essentially what this means is if you put the pinion gear on here with a D shaft, in this case it'll be the input cup that's on the rear and front differential, you put the gear onto that shaft and already torque can be transmitted with no set screw. And the set screw simply just holds it in position, that's it. I don't think it's a good idea to rely, especially on these, upwards of 8, 10 plus horsepower vehicles, to rely just on a set screw for transmitting torque. In fact, that's what we did on this V1 here when I had the 42 tooth spur gear in there. That was actually relying on the set screw, and I really didn't like that too much. But now we're changing things up yet again. And moving further on into the V2, we actually have changes done to inside of the front and rear differentials here. So I'm going to show pictures of what's been done differently there. These are the GP5 gear pairs that have been changed and updated. And the big difference there, instead of having the 43/13 gear pair, we are now moving to a 42/15 gear pair. And the reason that's important is because we're looking at the center section of the V2 Limitless, and it's going to rotate at a slower speed than the V1 center section will spin at. So let's say this was spinning at 1,000 RPMs here. We are going to be spinning on the V1 at a higher speed for our center section. And we know that higher speeds is going to contribute to more vibration and potentially have these drive shafts contact the center sections or just not spin truly and straight. And that's going to be an improvement to help out with this configuration on the V2. This is definitely an advantage to us, but one of the things to keep in mind is we have a lower final drive ratio here, so we're going to have to get a higher pinion/spur gear ratio in order to maintain the overall top speed. So this is going to be a slight disadvantage. I'm going to put it under that category just because we have to check our gearing and make sure that we're getting our gearing done correctly. So we did talk about the overall chassis plate is different. You can even see some other changes here where you got an extra couple pairs of holes here, 3 sets of holes. Those holes, as I mentioned, are from me. This is the only thing that I've actually changed to this Limitless. And there's a couple other hole patterns throughout the rest of the car that is different from V1 to V2, more than likely because it shares the same platform with other models of the Arrma lineup. Now moving into one of the last areas here, this is the front end on the Limitless V2. They have stiffened up the front springs here on the V2 as well as the sway bar that's located under there. You can just barely see it there. They have stiffened those up in comparison to the V1. I notice a very subtle difference, nothing too substantial here with the V1 versus the V2. Now, another thing that I think is actually quite substantial, and you can see it from this view. If you look down the line of the tire and you can see the vertical wing there, you can see some white space or a gap in between them. But if I go and show you the Limitless V1, you don't really see a gap there from the tire and the wing. So this is really interesting because not too long ago on the channel, we actually just talked about this exact thing, and I didn't know this even though I had the vehicle already. I didn't realize that the Arrma V2, it actually changes a part, and that part is the wheel axle. It's exactly what we did with the 1/8 scale buggy in order to get this tire out a little bit further. In fact, what they did is they moved to a 3mm larger wheel axle in order to get the wheels out further. A difference that is probably going to make a difference, although it is probably going to be somewhat subtle and only noticed by the guys that really truly can feel and have the sensitivity to feel the differences on their model. And there you have it, the differences here from a V2 model versus the V1 model. A lot of changes, a lot of advantages that you get with some subtle disadvantages along with that as well. We've now reached that part in the video where I feel obligated to give you my opinion as to, is the V2 worth spending all that kind of money if you already own a V1? I know that the V2 is definitely a step up in terms of the platform and everything it has to offer. However, the V1 is also a very good platform, especially if you're only trying to hit 100 miles per hour. It's very easy to do. I think the V2 is going to really shine for the guys that are pushing the envelope and getting well above that 130 mile per hour mark. That's probably where it's going to make all the difference in the world. But in terms of my opinion, I don't think I can be justified in one direction or not yet, because I really don't have any experience with that V2 platform. I'd like to build it up and see how that build goes, how all the components go. I have a little bit of concerns about how small the battery bays in length are, but hopefully that's not going to be a problem and everything will work out there as well. And we may end up doing a custom radio box / ESC mount just for the XLX2. A lot of things that I have to go and figure out whether I should, take a specific route or not. And then once we get it onto the road, then I can really see if I notice any significant performance gain from all of the different changes. I know there's quite a few subtle changes with this V2. So that's really going to be my conclusion. I know it's not giving you a direct answer. I think if you're on the market looking for a speedrun car now, you have to get the V2 anyway, and it is a little bit more money than I remember purchasing the V1 at, and it is definitely worth that extra cost if you're starting from nothing. So that's what I'm going to say for now. Hope you enjoyed the video. As always, like the video if you do. Don't forget to hit that sub button so that I can see you guys in that next video. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next one.